and thank you, Anthony, for that. Thank you for that formal thank you to the Climate Justice Working Group advocates. Really appreciated your leadership there, Rawa, and everyone on the the Climate Justice Working Group. So to pivot into the Inflation Reduction Act, maybe Anthony, you can start us off with our first question. With the funds that are expected to come, how or in what ways can this money be directed to benefit our communities if implemented equitably and effectively?
You're on mute.
Oh, sorry, thank you so much for that question. First and foremost, as I said earlier, we have to, what I like to call backcasting, look to go backwards in time to see where funding mechanisms have not benefited disadvantaged communities and other environmental justice communities, and we just can't make those same mistakes. We are seeing, some inklings of that occurring now with some of the mechanisms that have been announced for the release of funding. And Ra, I know we'll get into this more as well, but we have to make sure that people just know about what's happening. The information sharing has to be equitable, or the allocation of funding is not going to be equitable. And what I mean by that is that, there are lawmakers at the local and the state level who have no idea about some of the money that's already been announced and the roles that they need to play in making sure that that money gets to New York State and then redistributed to disadvantaged communities first and foremost. So we have to, call on Mr. John Podesta, who Joe Biden tapped to sort of be the purveyor and the facilitator of getting all this money out in an expeditious and equitable way. And then we also have to make sure that we're in touch with federal agencies like the Department of Energy and the Environmental Protection Agency, and let them know that the messaging is not getting out. Like people are not aware of what they need to do to even be in a position to apply for these competitive block grants. And then, to the extent that we can, we have to fight for more direct payments, so that grassroots groups like, where Rawa used to work with the Great Push Buffalo, some of the groups that I just named, your own group, Mo, LIP, Long Island Progressive Coalition, Rose, Nija, everyone needs to understand what they need to do to be in a position to get the money in the first place. So we have to move beyond webinars. I think that especially people who do our work, we don't, we're not twiddling our thumbs waiting to be called by the EPA. The work that we do is real grassroots organizing. We're on Zoom right now, but we would prefer to do this in person. That's how we do in climate justice and environmental justice work. That's how we do as Black people. Right? We don't do Zoom. When it's time to have a conversation, to share information, we come together. So I think that we really need to pressure federal, local, and state agencies to have these real conversations in real time, and to develop the tools that ensure that people are getting this information in real time. And because if we don't do that, we could have another New Deal moment. Last thing I'll say is that, and what I mean by that is that people will be shut out of the opportunity to get access to these dollars. There's just the last thing that I'll say that is that we already have a mechanism in the Inflation Reduction Act, which is going to benefit mainly white and affluent people, in the fact that 2/3 of that money is in the form of tax credits. And as the great Dorothy Brown, amazing lawyer, Black woman lawyer and author, wrote a book, The Whiteness of Wealth, she breaks down that tax credits have always been designed to benefit people who already have money and people who are affluent. And that in our country, that tends to be white folk, and we can't let that happen again. So we have a lot of work to do, which is why I like to say that we're not in the IRA implementation phase. We can't implement it until the money is allocated equitably. We're in the make sure the money gets allocated equitably phase. That's a lot, but that's a mouthful, but that's where we.
Now, I appreciate that, and definitely plus to information sharing and all those things. Rawa, would you want to add on?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Anthony said. The other thing that I really see besides information sharing is how can we be in this moment coming together to be very strategic, to be very coordinated and collaborative. And so I would like to actually invite philanthropy to be able to create some preliminary resources so that the folks that are actually first in line are the people that normally don't get these kinds of funds. We saw, for example, in the financial crisis of 2008, folks that were first in line were already very resourced organizations, communities, and oftentimes what that is meant for Black and Brown and Indigenous people and low income people is that we're just left behind. The fact that in 2008 that Black wealth was reduced by 50% and has not caught back up. The fact that Latinos lost something like 69% of their wealth, they have not regained that, so on and so forth. And so what we need in those mechanisms, because we can't just throw around words like equity, what does it actually look like in practice? And how are we going to actually hold accountable the government agencies and other stakeholders to ensure that they have basically stopgaps for the people that are going to get first in line because they already have all the resources in the world to say, no, not you, or not release funds to those entities. The other thing that they need to do is that there are, frontline communities across the nation that have already been advocating for these things and actually know what to do. Folks like, as Anthony mentioned, LIPC, The Point, Push Buffalo, Uprose, and many others I'm only naming the New York State folks, y'all, because this is a New York State context, but all over the country, there are brothers and sisters in solidarity that have not just been asking, but in practice have been building the future and what we would like it to look like. That's what true equity is. And so how do we ensure that those organizations are going to be the ones that are first in line? How do we ensure that those organizations are going to then align themselves with brothers and sisters on the ground that maybe don't know how to do this work, to be able to be the technical assistance providers, to do it in ways that actually are relevant to our communities, in ways that we want them and need them. I think another thing that needs to happen is this is a moment not only for philanthropy to get aligned and be, coordinated and strategizing with us. And in particular, those that already have shovel-ready projects going to get first in line, right? Those who are going to be secondary and tertiary, how do we hold that money over not just the next 3 years when it has to be expensed, but the next, 5 years, the next 7 years, allowing them the time to be able to develop the technical capacity to actually implement these projects, but more importantly, that after the fact, the expertise will be embedded in their communities, so that as we continue, in 5 years, 10 years, so on down the line, that they're able to go to a different scale than these first projects for them. I've got so many other things to say there. Obviously, that's that piece. I think the other thing is making sure that the partners on the ground are partnerships with the state agencies. We are really aligned. I do appreciate that we came up with the DAC criteria. Pretty big. I do appreciate that the CAC adopted their scoping plan back in January. And that is really, that's the blueprint or guidebook, the guardrails that we need to use to implement CLCPA. And the other thing I'm just going to say is, how they are killing us isn't just by polluting our communities. How they are killing us is that it took us several years, after decades and decades of trying to push for climate legislation, right, before it was too late. And now we know what the IPCC report is saying. But now, even after we have major wins, years after, going through all the processes, we have to follow process. Why is it that our elected officials and the fossil fuel industries that are out to get us don't follow any process, throw a lot of money at the problem, and then undermine all the work that we've done? So now when we actually have the opportunity to transition our economy and the funding mechanisms are actually in place, all due to the hard work of frontline environmental and climate justice organizers and people, to now also be fighting, continuing in that struggle to fight them after we've already won, to try to hold the line while also trying to ensure that the funding mechanisms are being directed to where they're supposed to, while, right, also fighting the bad things about the IRA, like the fact that they've created all of Alaska and pretty much all of the Gulf South is now declared a major sacrifice zone, right? Which doesn't sit well with us. Many of us did not sign on for the IRA because it meant places like Louisiana and Alaska were going to be opened up for more oil drilling, right? So, you know, when we say that this is a real struggle, that is what we mean. I mean, we are operating on all cylinders.
Thank you, Rawa, for that, giving us a little bit of the history on how these, how we got here, and, you know, just a little bit about that the communities that are really on the front lines of this struggle do have some shovel-ready projects that are like willing and ready to take these funds, but the barriers that may be there for against them. So I don't know if maybe you want to touch back on just like what are some of those shovel-ready projects, and what would it look like to get them funding to them from the IRA?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you Uprose has been trying to, you know, already started. They're already in the process of having an incredible community solar project. What this would mean is all those rooftops all over New York City, they would actually put solar on the roof, which means that, you know, anybody can invest in that. In particular, folks that don't have very many assets could now begin to start building assets by investing in solar on the roof, right? And what is beautiful about that is it's a way to build community wealth. It's a way to build individual wealth, but in ways that actually have multiple benefits, not only for our communities and our people, but also our planet by harnessing, you know, the power of the sun. They're also just won a major fight after 7 years of funding an industry on the waterfront, where now they have an opportunity to be able to build wind. Again, similar investment strategies and ownership strategies where many people in the community are able to own parts of these investments, meaning that we are going to be owning our energy futures together, right? And so it doesn't matter that I don't live in an apartment building. If I've invested in that rooftop solar, I will receive credits as well as a financial resource back to me wherever I live. And again, it's moving away from this hyper individualism that's gotten us to the climate crisis and actually going back to what many of us come from, our lineage. You know, we're all indigenous to some land, which is this idea of cooperative economics. In places like Buffalo, New York, where Push Buffalo is, they've been building for the last 15 years a whole, you know, 40 block sort of just transition in practice, which is really thinking about building affordable housing. They're now getting into first-time home ownership to address issues of redlining for Black and Brown people to own net zero housing. It's got things like community solar, green infrastructure, or nature-based solutions to address its combined sewer overflow problem to make sure that we have clean water to drink. It is making sure that every one of these is a workforce opportunities for people that have been historically marginalized, returning citizens, people that are chronically or underemployed, youth who are not on a college track, to be able to go actually into the trades or these new energy jobs that are family sustaining. So that's what I'm talking about, is that we are already building the future. I mean, LIPC, the work that you guys have done, not only within in solidarity with indigenous communities, but building renewable energy projects all over Long Island, is exactly the kind of example that the world needs to see, and what the federal government and our local state government needs to be funding.
Thank you, Rawa, for that. Anthony, do you want to jump in on some community wealth building and shovel-ready projects?
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, I think that, I mean, first of all, like what Uprose is doing is absolutely incredible. They also have the GRID program, and Elizabeth's gonna kill me because I always forget what GRID stands for. But just go to Uprose's website and you can see for yourself. But you know, having to do with their industrial waterfront, you know, like if the investment is there, that those are shovel-ready jobs ready to go as well. But what Uprose is doing with the community solar, and also what Push has been doing, you know, in that front is really, really important, because you know what we don't want to do is, like I like to say this all the time, we want a just transition, not just a transition. And we don't want to replace a fossil fuel empire with a renewable energy empire. And so like we do have to think about decentralization. We do have to think about microgrids and things like that, because we also also know that if we're not careful, we see ahead of the Inflation Reduction Act, President Biden authorized the Defense Production Act, which would allow for a lot more mining of so-called critical minerals. Where are these critical minerals located? In indigenous areas in the United States, indigenous areas in Africa. I'm just saying, like, it might be a coincidence that Kamala is over in Africa right now, when we need all these critical minerals, and we don't want to create a new generation of energy sacrifice or economic sacrifice. So that's really important. But one other area where there's shovel-ready jobs is in urban agroecology. If you look at the mighty formation of Climate Justice Alliance, they have many groups who are doing just that. A big shout out to our dear sister, now City Councilwoman Dora Robinson and Urban Tilth and what they're doing there. Our family with Black Dirt Collective out of Philly, and then of course, our siblings in Borinquen, Organización Boricua. Those are shovel-ready jobs too, because we know that, especially as marginalized people, we need to be in control of our own food sources and our own food generation. Rawa talked about that circular, economy. Imagine like decentralizing all of that, and as we like to say, but back in the day at CJA, we need to just scale up and scale out, what's already happening. So, the only thing I would add to what, like, everything that Rawa adroitly broke down is that there's the need for people to understand that these frontline environmental justice, climate justice communities have the solutions, right? They produce doctors and lawyers and architects and policy experts, politicians, lawmakers, and all of that as well. They're not waiting to be saved. They're waiting for the dollars to increase the work that they're already doing and actualize the solutions that, as Rawa stated, we've been developing since way before first contact with colonizers. I mean, it's ironic that, what we're trying to go back to is what some refer to as traditional indigenous knowledge, and that might be probably the only thing that saves us. So when we're thinking about shovel-ready jobs, I would invite people to emancipate themselves, or have an exodus, because I'm Jewish and tomorrow's Passover. Hag Sameach to everybody out there who celebrates. An exodus from thinking that it's only infrastructure, that it's only sort of like patriarchal men in top hats, and whatnot. Also shovel-ready jobs are care work. Care work is green as it gets, and we need to make sure that we're investing in those folk as well, because whether it's caretakers or people in our amazing nurses and many other jobs that are predominated by our women siblings, those are shovel-ready jobs that need to be invested in as well, because we may be able to use this Inflation Reduction Act to get rid of this damn racialized wealth gap, this gendered wealth gap, and this ableism wealth gap as well. So shovel-ready jobs aren't just like skyscrapers and pipes and things like that. It's also about the infrastructure of humanity, not just sort of like physical infrastructure.
I so appreciate that last sentiment about the infrastructure of humanity. Thank you. So the next question, you all kind of touched on it already, but I just wanted to bring it up. It's something we also touched on last webinar. Priya gave us insight on accessibility to benefits from the IRA, such as business and consumer tax credits that requires wealth. So how would we, or where's the opportunity to organize and overcome that challenge and that barrier for frontline communities and businesses, so that we are able on the front lines to take advantage of the consumer tax credits and such?
I'm gonna give this one a Rob, because she already did it in Buffalo, at the state level. I mean, just replicate what Rob was about to tell you, that we already got the blueprint.
Yeah, I mean, we do have the blueprint. I mean, many, we have a saying back at Push Buffalo, which is help is not coming. We got us. That's really what started, with hundreds and hundreds of folks that were considered low income, poor, folks of color, all the things. And what we understood was that we saved ourselves many times over, and we will continue to save ourselves. And that we actually just, through our dreaming, our imagination, our lived experiences could map out, not the reality that's given to us, but what is it that we actually want in our community? That's what started Push Buffalo. 400 people just got together in a room and dreamed, not what is, but what could be and what should be. And if you fast forward, as I said, 15 years later, you are beginning to see all of that and how over time we've been scaffolding these solutions. And really, I talk about it, and I'm not going to go too deeply into it. But as Anthony knows, I always just say, you know what? This is going over your head. Just come see it. Just come see it. I promise you. I promise you. You're going to be really impressed. And people come over and they're like, oh my God, I knew you guys were doing dope stuff, but we had no idea this is what you were doing, right? And I've actually had the privilege of visiting other communities, whether it's in Miami, whether it's in California, whether it's even in parts of Seattle. Folks are actually doing this. You go to Thunder Valley up in South Dakota. Our indigenous brothers and sisters are rebuilding whole blocks, rebuilding schools, affordable housing, renewable energy projects. And it's the people that are of and from those communities that are actually building them. And it's about reconnecting the indigenous lifeway, right? Which is a practice. But I did want to say, like, the opportunities that we see with the IRA in particular for our communities in New York State is we do have the CLCPA. Yes, we're going to continue to fight hard to make sure that they don't water it down. But for right now, it's still intact. And the reality is, families are able to get something like $14,000 back in actual rebates, not tax credits, actual rebates on top of your federal tax credits for things like heat pumps, right? What we love about heat pumps, especially, I don't know about you, but the weather has gone berserk of late. We've had things from these crazy ice storms to crazy superstorms to crazy windstorms to then it's 70 degrees. Then the next day it's 23 degrees. And what we're going to be seeing and experiencing is these fluctuations that really don't make a lot of sense. So we're going to have to reimagine again about how we're going to produce food, the livability of our homes. And when I think about young children in particular and elders who are the most vulnerable populations in a place like Buffalo, New York, that has the oldest housing stock as the third poorest city, is that we really need to move as quickly as possible, not only to decarbonize our buildings, which is a major source of pollution, but we need to address issues of, using these dollars to do things like green efficiency and weatherization. But before we do that, what I know about the housing in my community, it's full of lead, it's full of asbestos, it's full of mold, it has structural issues. So we have home repair dollars that can actually fix those things before we seal a home and don't seal people in with all that pollution. And then access to renewable energy resources, from rooftop solar to community solar to things like heat pumps. Why we love heat pumps is that A, they're electric, B, they actually provide both heating and cooling. So as we address these fluctuations, and we saw in places like Chicago and a lot of the Rust Belt cities a few years ago when, we experienced 90-degree plus days where they're thinking this summer we're going to get to 100, which is actually not something that we normally experience. So most people do not have AC or, cooling centers anywhere near them that they can get to. That means hundreds of people are going to die from heat stroke, right? And so heat pumps actually allow you to both have heating and cooling. So when we think about the livability and how we're going to live through the climate disruptions due to climate change that we're living in, those are the kinds of things that will be able to do. You'll be able to get like an induction stove. I actually have a plug-in one. I'm going to get rid of my old fossil fuel gas stove, because these induction stoves are so much better for cooking in. The way they heat up, they're much less dangerous, and they do not. 40% of indoor pollution comes from your combustion gas stove. That's an incredible amount for people dealing with upper respiratory issues, asthma, you name it. It is no longer going to be a problem. And you know what? With the rebates that are coming, these are the federal rebates. It's going to cost you a couple of $100 or no dollars. And then with the state actual rebate coming in, not the tax credit, I'm sorry, but the rebate, you might spend $0 to a couple of $100. And I'm not talking about for like the cheap, inexpensive one. I'm talking about the really top of the line one, right? So Consumer Reports have actually put this information out there. This is a neutral party. It is not climate justice activists that said that. It's not, elected officials. So I think right now, the other thing that we need to be doing is, and we've been doing in our communities, as I know LIPC and others have been, is we've been talking a lot about this technology and using, everything from infographics to popular education to doing cooking demonstrations on how to use these new technology. And folks have been able to make things like, pastelillos and, make breakfast for so all the scare tactics of like, I need my fire combusted, stove is just absolutely ridiculous. This new technology is not the old coils. This is a whole heat transfer situation that is actually much better. And then when I think in terms of like comfortability in my home around having AC, especially for vulnerable people, I think that is really, really important. I do think that we need to invest, yes, in infrastructure, but you know what? Buffalo just had a big storm where the substations froze. That had nothing to do with transitioning to electric, right? People lost power and lots of people died, unfortunately. So guess what? There's technology like infrastructure. So now they can enclose that so it doesn't freeze. But the other thing that they can do is because of the wind coming in and out in ways that it didn't do before, knocking down trees and knock down power lines, is just like your fiber optics, just like your phone lines. What we need to do is actually bury the lines underground. So we have solutions. The solution is not to say, oh no, it's going to cause this, right? It's just to say, hey, National Grid, what could you be doing better and maybe move up to the 21st century and help us out here, right? And there is actually funding in the both the bipartisan infrastructure law and IRA for folks like these utilities to upgrade their infrastructure.
Thank you, Rawa, for that. I really appreciated all of that information that you shared with us. Anthony, do you want to add on, even though I know Rawa just killed it?
No, the mic's broken. It's fine.
Mic drop on that. All right. So our next question is another thing that we just wanted to re-emphasize from our first episode or first webinar on this series about the timeline and the milestones that are coming up for the IRA, or that, like you all have already said, that are already here, especially with the tax credits. So would you, Anthony, maybe start us off on what are the timelines? What should we be looking out for right now, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, and I know I'm kind of like skipping ahead and answering a question from one of our audience members, but we're working with New York News right now. We're working with lawmakers to develop sort of like a living worksheet that people will be able to access when something is announced, and also guidelines on like what you need to do to be able to access them. So I mean, what we do know is that there is a pool of funding, about $3 million coming to the state. The deadline to apply or to send in a notice of intent to participate was on March 31st. I'm very happy to report that the Department of Environmental Conservation did send in that notice of intent to participate, and we're kind of asking them, okay, what are you going to do with this $3 million? We got to be a little bit more transparent with that. Cities have 2 more weeks. I believe it's April 14th, or metropolitan statistical areas, which is a whole thing I don't necessarily want to get into right now, but they have until April 28th, to send in their notice of intent to prepare. And the thing that's really scary, Mo, about that right now is that, like, if you the one decent thing EPA did was like they also have a living worksheet, so you can see who's actually sent in a notice of intent to participate. And I think there's one city out of the 67 statistical metropolitan areas so far that have actually done so, and I believe it was Honolulu in Hawaii. So places like Buffalo haven't done so yet. New York City hasn't done so yet. So we're working with local lawmakers and some very disgruntled city council members who are upset they didn't know about this, including Chair Gennaro, who's always disgruntled, but like even more disgruntled now. And so that's one big thing. The other one that I would say that's really significant, and Rawa's been talking about this for a while, is that there is $550 million that has been, announced, yet the mechanism is really, really tricky and really, really interesting. And we have to work very, very hard, as we were saying earlier, to make sure that toxic allocation structures are not replicated, because that 550 million is only going to go to 11 entities, 10 EPA regions, and I believe they're setting aside 50 million for a tribe as well, to essentially act as a philanthropist and then redistribute to grassroots groups who would have to apply with them. And I know that's a mouthful. EPA has also let us know that, more money will be announced this summer, but it'll be another big pot of money that might follow that same model of sort of, I like to call them the anointed 11, the anointed groups who will be handling big swaths of money that then CBOs, grassroots groups will have to apply through them to get actual direct payments from them. And it's a double-edged sword, Rao and I've had conversations with this. We're having conversations with this with formations like Climate Justice Alliance, as well, to navigate all of this. It's a double-edged sword, Mo, because like on the one hand, the way the Inflation Reduction Act was designed, if that money doesn't go out the door in the next like 2 to 4 years, it's gone. It just expires, right? So the idea is we got to get a lot of money out the door very, very quickly. And this is the model that they chose to utilize. So that's a lot. I mean, that's what's like what we know. I think what's more important is going back to the information gathering and sharing phase, because like this it comes out fast, you and Raul are as busy as I am, as our sister Avriel, who's running tech for us, are. I don't know, how many emails do we get a day? You know what I'm saying? Like not even counting like the junk mail folder, which you have to check sometimes, because sometimes we just don't recognize, and our work emails just kind of filter them to the spam folder. But that's how this information is being disseminated right now. And it should not be on you, Mo, or Rawa, to like have to check like emails, to make sure I didn't miss an email from the federal government about funding opportunities. So I think that's what's more important. But look, I mean, we'll be sharing this spreadsheet with New York Renews, who will share it more readily to more people very, very soon. Please keep checking it. I know our amazing team at New York Renews, Maria and Zava and Avriel and Aurora and Devin and Irene and Stefan are going to, they know how to get, and Zazu, sorry, they know how to get information out. So like, if you are not like subscribed to like a New York Renews mailing list right now, please do so, because I mean, this is very, very important to us. One more thing that I want to say before I shut up, because, Rawa alluded to the fact that we are fighting to save our nation-leading climate law right now from being adulterated. When we're talking about information sharing, we also have to confront misinformation. And there is misinformation being shared right now that because of the way that our state currently and accurately accounts for methane emissions, that could preclude New York State from being eligible for federal funding via the IRA. That's complete bullshit. I just want to say that like explicitly. There is no mechanism in the IRA that says if your state accounts for this or doesn't account for this, that you are excluded from receiving funding. So rest assured, anyone who's been hearing that narrative, it is absolutely not true. We're working with some of our amazing congressional delegation partners like Ocasio-Cortez and Jamal Bowman and Representative Espaillat to release a statement to that effect of just like, this is not true. We are your federal elected officials, and we would have obviously confronted this if that was the case, right? Ocasio-Cortez said to me herself, we would never have voted for this if like it would have interrupted New York from implementing the CLCPA. Why would we do that? So that's absolutely not true. But yeah, just please stay in touch with us, and we're going to do our best, and then hopefully we will our state agencies like DEC and NYSERDA, who we do work closely with, will also join that effort to just get this information out. But for now, unless I'm like mistaken in terms of like direct payments to CBOs, that's not really available just yet. I hope that changes soon. And then everything else that Rao was saying in terms of like rebates, that's available, that's in effect. Last thing I'll say on this is that like if you were looking to get a new electric vehicle and get that $7,500 rebate, that's probably going to take a little bit longer. There are currently barely any cars in the United States right now, EV zero emission vehicles, that would qualify for that rebate. because they're saying that, like, you know, the minerals and a lot of things have to be constructed and manufactured in the United States in order for those cars to be eligible, or nations that was just added that we have free, that, well, not we, United States has free trade agreements with. So, you know, pay really, really close attention to that. Please don't like go buy like a brand new Tesla and thinking you're going to get $7,500 back yet. So we need more guidance on that as well. But yeah, I mean, it's not a great answer, unfortunately, but, you know, stay tuned. You know, we are going to do our best to get all this information out, especially to our grassroots partners, because, I mean, you know, it's a bilateral situation, Mo, where there are a lot of grassroots and CBOs who are just not versed in getting federal dollars. And then in the same token, the federal government is not used to giving, not versed in giving this much money out to the grassroots, because the federal government was never designed to give this much money out to the grassroots in the first place.
Thank you, Anthony. Yeah, we are very much in the middle of a lot of things happening all at once, and the rollout is a little crazy. Rawa, is there anything there that Anthony might have missed, or just you want to add on to?
No, Anthony said it all. So everything Anthony said, the only thing that I will add is if you are a community-based organization and you are interested in applying for any of these funds, please make sure that your sam.gov registration is current. There is an application due on, I believe it's March 30 or May 31st. For anyone that is interested in being a partner on that $550 million that Anthony mentioned, to help disperse the funds or be an administrator. And that's so we're in region 2. That's New York, Virginia, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico.
Thank you, Rawa and Anthony. So I didn't say this before, but the Q&A chat box is open. So if folks have questions for our panelists, please put your questions in the QA box and we will call on you and get your questions answered. And thank you, Rawa and Anthony, for starting us off and giving us all of that information. If anyone has a question, please drop it in the chat, the Q&A box. And don't be shy. I know you all came for particular reasons, and please, we would like to answer at least 1 or 2 of your questions. While we wait
getting ready to go watch the new Godfather of Harlem episode. That's what it is.
Well, while we wait to see if folks have questions, maybe Rawa, you want to give us your final thoughts as we are coming to the end of the webinar.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of pressure. I don't know what final thoughts I have, other than maybe I always like to end everything with a direct action or a call to action. Now is a moment to please call any of your elected officials in the New York State Legislature, call the governor and her office, get Kathy Hochul, call Parker and ask them to pull this bill. The only folks that will benefit from this is the fossil fuel industry, changing that rule, by the way, that 3 states have and how they're trying to calculate methane. Methane, while it evaporates much more quickly than other greenhouse gas emissions, actually does a lot of harm, a lot more harm than greenhouse gas emissions as far as warming the planet. So this little tricky thing that they're trying, like this tricky, funny math that they're asking for right now is actually going to cause us more harm, will not get us to the mandates that we are seeking, will much more quickly send us off that cliff versus reversing us backwards away from this cliff that the IPCC and other folks have warned us about. So I would just say, please, this is really critical. It's really important. It's about all of us. And please ask the governor to come back to her senses and just pull this bill all together. Thank you.
Thank you, Rawa. I see we have a couple questions. Crystal asks, what can one do to help decrease inflation? Not sure.
I don't know that. I mean, that's just a question that like has so many geopolitical variables to it. I you know, just to say that, of course, we're still, the economy is still recovering from the shock of a global pandemic that had massive impacts on supply lines and whatnot, and that's not going to happen overnight. Regular people should just make sure that they're in touch with their lawmakers and asking them, you know, that question. That's really on them. I think I'm just trying to see who asked that question. That's not on you, right? That's not something that, like, you know, everyday residents of the country are responsible for. But I mean, certainly, you know, one thing that we can do is press our lawmakers, to Rawa's point about fossil fuel corporations and cartels benefiting, is we need windfall profit tax right now. That money can be reinvested. That industry made like record profits, and they were definitely exploiting everyday residents, like the person who asked that question. Just like the, you know, the only other thing that I just want to say to Rao's point about our accounting method is the 20-year accounting method, right? As Rao said, you know, methane is more heat trapping, 80 times more heat trapping than carbon dioxide in the short term, 20 years. The other thing is that while the 100-year accounting model is utilized by a lot of other countries and a lot of other entities, as MIT scientists are telling us now, the 100-year model was an accident of history, quote unquote, an accident of history, because when that model was created, we were like measuring climate change that we needed to avert it by 2100, but our targets are now 2050, net zero by 2050. Biden says net zero by 2050. So ergo, we have to shorten the time frame that we are evaluating the global warming potential of emissions. And this is the last thing that I'll say, as the fossil fuel industry, the governor and Senator Parker are attempting to beguile and scare New Yorkers with false narratives. The 20-year accounting method leads automatically to higher energy prices. Don't fall for that. There are countries in Europe right now that are using the 100-year accounting model and they are paying 2 to 3 times more for electricity than we are in the United States. So it has nothing to do with the accounting model. There are so many other things that like go into an electricity pricing scheme. And then finally, what I'll say is that, by the way, utilities cannot unilaterally or impulsively do rate hikes. Right? There is a public service law that we have in our state, Public Service Law Section 65, that requires a public process by the public service commissions. They have to approve that before it happens. So, you know, just more, you know, to say about that. To Rawa's points of like, yes, right, the governor, right, Senator Parker, right, Assembly Member Barrett, and let them know that we don't want this in our budget. It has no room to be in our budget. And right now, what we should be doing is concentrating on implementing the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, not adulterating it. We're not going back to 2019. If it was good enough, the 20-year accounting model was good enough for certain senators to sponsor the CLCPA and vote for it in 2019. We have to ask ourselves what's changed in 2023.
All right. Thank you, Anthony, for answering that question. And did you have any closing thoughts that you wanted to share? Or
no, I was trying to find, I do have a link for the sibling that asked the question about the sam.gov that Rawa wisely mentioned, because this is important. So I am going to put it in the chat, because it's saying the chat is closed. So I'm not sure where to put it, Abrielle, so I'm going to put it in the hosts and panelists. There's the link, and then maybe we can share that with everybody else.
Yes, I believe we will do a follow-up to this webinar, so folks will have the links that we talked about in this this session. So I just want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you 100 times over to Rawa and Anthony for etching out this time to share with us your expertise, your years of experience with advocacy and dedication to climate justice. Thank you to everyone who joined us in this very busy time of budget session and all the things that folks have going on in their world. And so on behalf of New York Renews, I want to thank everyone for joining. We do have more webinars coming up on other topics. The next one will be April 11th, I believe, and that will be at 6 p.m. as well. So please stay tuned for the next webinars in the New York Renew series, and stay tuned for the email to follow up with the links and also how to stay in touch with us regarding the Inflation Reduction Act rollout. So have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you, Monique, and thank you, Abrielle. Have a good
Yes,
night.
thank you both. Take care, everybody.
Yes, thank
More
you,
Rutland. Yeah.
everyone.